Hello and welcome back. This is the week 7 lecture. So we are continuing with analysis this week. And just like before, we are focusing on reviews. So I introduced this genre of writing last week, and we talked a little bit about the basics, just what it means to review something. And we also practiced writing reviews of our own last week with our most recent discussion post. So hopefully you guys had some fun with that, at least when it came to picking your own albums or your own movies slash shows that you could review. So it's a pretty simple writing style. Like we were saying last week, it's a style that we see a lot. It's a style that we've experienced before, either as readers or as writers, so hopefully it feels pretty familiar. So I want to review just a few of the things that we talked about last week, and then we'll move forward and we'll start thinking more about what we're going to do for this week's discussion post. And we can also start thinking a little bit about Essay 2, which is coming up soon, and we'll talk about it more near the end of this lecture, and we'll be talking about it all next week as we actually start working on it. But let's just go back over a couple of things that I mentioned last time. So just remember that to analyze something literally means to take it apart, to break it down into its individual parts and elements in order to examine all of those individual parts and elements. And then once you understand how all of those parts work and how they work together, the relationships they have together, then you'll have a better understanding of how the entire thing, your entire subject, works. So remember, we're sort of disassembling things. Now, that might be a physical process, like we could literally do that with a car engine or some kind of mechanical object that we could analyze. Like we really would be taking it apart and we could hold up the individual parts and look at them. But of course, if we're doing this with a song, or a movie, a book, these aren't things that we can necessarily disassemble in a literal physical sense, but we are still breaking them down just by looking at their individual parts. So hopefully we've already been able to do a little bit of this in our practice run. So we were able to talk about the song by breaking the song down, or the album down, into its individual parts. So we're talking about individual songs or individual lyrics or individual instrumentation. Same with the movie or show review. When you guys were working on that, if you were doing a movie or show, I hope that well, I think we had to, right? We had to do the music and we had to do the movie and show. So with those movies or shows, those are narratives, right? So you could just do a sort of rehearsal of those narrative elements that we studied back at the beginning of the semester. You could break a show down by looking at its characters, its plot, some of its key themes, and its, key settings. All right. So that's how we analyze. That's just a general rule for analyzing. You want to break your subject down into its individual parts. That's how you study it. That's how you arrive at a greater understanding of that subject. And remember, that's what we want. That's our ultimate goal when we analyze. We're not just breaking something down for the sake of doing it. We're breaking something down to understand it, to arrive at a conclusion that we can share with our audience. So we arrive at a greater understanding as the analyst, as the writer, and then when we write, we share our understanding with our audience. So that's what we want by the end. So we're doing a specific kind of analysis, which, like we've said, is the review. So that basic process does not change, but we have a few specific things that we have to do when we're writing a review. We have some boxes to check, some steps to follow. So I talked about the basic steps last time, and I just want to go back over these to make sure that we have them down, because we're really going to need to utilize all of these steps not only this week when we do our next practice round, but also when we get into Essay 2. So remember, when we are reviewing, no matter what it is that we are reviewing, it could be an album, it could be a show. This week, we're going to review some new things. So we're going to be looking at a book or a restaurant. We're going to do a travel destination, and we're also going to do a product review. All right. So we can review almost anything. Like I was saying last week, we can analyze almost anything. This is not unique to school. This is not unique to English class. This is a very broadly applicable writing skill, which is exactly why we're learning it. So we're reviewing different things, but it doesn't matter what it is that you are reviewing. You always want to follow these steps or go through these 4 stages when you're reviewing. So we went over these last week. You start with the descriptive stage. So this is when you're describing the thing that you're analyzing. And remember, we refer to that as your subject. So if you're writing a product review on a particular type of AI program that helps you proofread your papers, that program, that AI service, that's your subject. That's what you're reviewing. In other words, that's what you're analyzing. So you always want to start by describing your subject. You cannot assume that all of your readers are super familiar with it. You can assume that we probably have a general idea of what it is, or we've at least heard of something like it before, but maybe we haven't seen that show. Maybe we have not used that product. Maybe we have not listened to that album. So you have to describe your subject using some of those descriptive details, active verbs, good adjectives, like we talked about back in week 4 when we were still working on our narratives. But also, you can provide some specific details about the thing that you are reviewing. So if it's a show, pick out maybe a particular character or two, or a particular scene or two that you can just mention. You're not really getting into any of that stuff in great detail yet, but you want to maybe mention some highlights, some of the best features of your subject, just to get us familiar with it, just to kind of get your readers comfortable with the content, getting the readers to know the subject a little bit so we can follow your analysis that's going to come soon. All right. So you're going to do the descriptive work in your first paragraph, right? And if this is just a short discussion post, then the descriptive stage really might only consist of a few sentences. But once we get to essay 2, you're going to spend more time on the descriptive stage. It might take up most of your first paragraph, maybe not all of it, but it's largely what you're going to be doing in that introductory paragraph in essay 2. But obviously, discussion posts are shorter, so you can have less description. But you want to start getting somewhat specific right off the bat here, right away in the descriptive stage. Don't just summarize your product. Again, that's easy information to find. If we just wanted a general summary of the TV show, we don't need to read a review, right? We can go somewhere else for a summary. A review is something different. So you really don't want to summarize. You want to describe, and you want to offer some specifics as a way to get us introduced to your subject. So that's the first stage, that descriptive stage. All right. Once you're done with that, you move on to the analytical stage. And like I was saying, this is where most of your analysis, most of your content will be here in this second stage. So this will be most of your body paragraphs when you write essay 2. This is really where you are analyzing your subject. You're breaking it down into all the individual elements that you want to explore. So again, if it's a book or a show or a movie, this is your chance to really get into detail about all of those narrative elements, whichever ones you want to talk about. Now, if it's a restaurant or a product, then you're not talking about characters or plot, but you still have individual elements that you can look at. So if you're doing a product review, there's still ways to break down the product. There's actually a number of different ways that you can do that. So if it's a somewhat sophisticated product, if it's kind of complex, it has a lot of parts, then you can really spend most of your time breaking down the product itself and talking about how it works, how well it works, by really looking at all of its individual parts. You could definitely do that with something electronic, with anything that has multiple parts, anything that you have to assemble, build, you know. There's lots of ways to just sort of literally break it down into those individual parts. But if it's maybe a pretty simple product, like it doesn't have a lot of parts, you can think about other ways to break it down. So if you bought it from a store, if you actually walked into a store, or even if you did your purchase online, there might be an element of customer service that you could talk about. That would be another element. The marketing of the product, the way it was advertised, the way you were first exposed to it, the way you were able to learn about it and buy it. Again, whether that's online or in a brick and mortar store, all of that could be individual elements. You know, if I walked into Walmart to buy a new laptop, I mean, I could talk about all the parts that go into the laptop, but I could also talk about my experience purchasing that product at the place where I purchased it. So it's really whatever you want to do. If you have a bit of a customer service focus, then that can be multiple elements. You can even take that experience and look at the different parts, the people that helped you, the way the store showcased the product. I mean, it's really whatever you want. Maybe you're interested in advertising. You're interested in how the product was sold to you. The advertising campaign, the commercials, the print ads, those annoying pop-up ads that come up when you're, online. So you could really look at it in a lot of different ways, but you have to break that product down into some different elements that are, included in that overall product experience. Same with the restaurant, right? You don't just have to talk about the brick and mortar restaurant, although you certainly can. You can talk about the service. You can talk about the ambiance, right? How was it to sit in there? Was it a pleasant experience? Did you have nice music playing? Were the lights at the right level of brightness? Was it too loud? Was it too quiet? Did you like the seating arrangement? All of those are potential elements. And that's not even mentioning the food. Obviously, you can spend a lot of your time, as many restaurant reviewers do, they talk about the food, right? They talk about specific dishes, what was good, what wasn't. But they're also going to mention service, ambiance, and those other things, right? Because those are all elements, those are all parts that go into the subject that you are analyzing. So you're going to do most of that work in the analytical stage. Break it down, talk about those individual parts, talk about the relationships between those parts, and now you're analyzing. Now you're arriving at conclusions. Now you're explaining things. Now you are showing your audience how this thing works. And that's what you want. Then you move on to the interpretive stage. So this happens near the end of your review. I would really recommend, at least if we're thinking about a longer essay, I would recommend having your interpretation come at the end of your body paragraphs. Like this might be the final body paragraph, or it might be what you're doing at the end of your final body paragraph. But your interpretation is basically when you're uncovering the larger meaning or significance of your subject. So this will read differently depending on what you're reviewing. So if you're talking about a movie or a show or a book, you're really talking about your understanding of the themes, right? What does this narrative mean? What is the message? What is it trying to express or communicate? So if you go back to one of those examples I posted last week, the review of the Star Wars show, Andor, I think it is, if I recall, there's a lot of Star Wars shows, but that was a big part of that review. The author had a certain interpretation of the show, but not just what the show meant, but why the show was significant, why the show is sort of resonating with people right now. And that's a very common move to make as the reviewer. You don't only want to say, well, I like this is good. You're also, again, remember, you're analyzing it. So you're trying to arrive at a greater understanding. And you really get a chance to show that off with your interpretation. That's where you're trying to explain what it is, what it means, what it does, and why it matters. So you can focus on whatever seems most important. If you're doing that product review, it's not so much about meaning, right? We don't have to interpret the meaning of the product. We probably already know it by the time we get to the interpretive stage, but you're really sort of explaining why it matters. Like you're sort of establishing the value of the product, right? Like this is why it's a good thing to have. This is why it's a good thing to buy. This is what it can do for you. This is how it can be beneficial to you. So you're really focused more on larger significance. Now, with a restaurant, yeah, it's going to be, or even like a travel destination, those might be just more like value judgments. Like, not just I like it, but rather, this is why it's good. This is why people should go there. This is why it's a beneficial experience. And that's not hard to think about. I mean, when you're recommending a restaurant, there's a lot that goes into it, right? I mean, of course, you think the food is good. Otherwise, you wouldn't recommend it. But like we were just saying, there's more to the dining out experience than just the food, right? So you're recommending the restaurant for a multitude of reasons. And the sort of big picture idea is that it's just going to be a very positive experience for your friend or whoever you're, recommending this to. Your audience could be friends, could be strangers. But if you're recommending it to them, you really want to think about all the reasons why. It's a beneficial experience. Why? What all can a person get out of this experience? And that will allow you to dig deeper and provide more of a sense of that larger significance. Same with a travel destination. Of course, you're recommending it because you like it and you think people will also like it. Other people will like it too. But there's more to it, right? What are the other things that people can get out of it? Why is it significant? Why is it worth the expense? And the world is full of desirable places, desirable restaurants, desirable products. What's special about this one? What's special about the one that you are reviewing? What makes it particularly important, enjoyable, meaningful, if you are focusing on meaning and that level of interpretation? But whatever it is, you can always find something, some larger understanding of the thing that you can arrive at, and then you share it through writing with your audience. So, like I said, this happens kind of while you're analyzing, but certainly it can be the final part of your analysis. It can be like the final part of your body, the body of your paper. You sort of wrap up that analytical section by spending a little bit of time interpreting. So the interpretive stage will not take you as long as the analytical stage. Think of the analytical stage as the hard work that you have to do in order to arrive at the interpretive stage. Because what you're interpreting is just based on your analysis, right? You're just taking all of that data that you've generated in your analysis and you're arriving at a conclusion based on that data, right? Based on everything you've been talking about with all those parts and all those elements. So once you're finished with the interpretive stage, you have probably moved on to your concluding paragraph. So this is the final stage, and this is the evaluation. Okay, this is the evaluative stage. So this is a part that most students can appreciate and enjoy. This really is where you are providing your assessment, right? You have examined this subject, you have broken it down exhaustively, you have interpreted it, right? So now the only thing left is to offer your final evaluation. Is it good? Is it worth going to? Is it worth buying? This is where you are directly addressing your readers. And you're basically telling your readers, go and see this movie. download this album, take a trip to this place, or the opposite, don't. Or in some cases, you might have a more complex recommendation. Do it, but maybe only under certain circumstances. So, whatever you want to tell your readers, whatever your final evaluation is, this is where you are offering that overall assessment of the quality of the thing, whatever your subject is. So that will pretty much consume most of your concluding paragraph. But remember, this is not a summary of what other people have said, right? We can find that if we want it. The evaluation, and of course, everything that comes before it, really has to come from you. We don't have to talk about AI a lot this week, but I've already mentioned, and you guys should know this by now because you guys know plenty about chatbots and how they work. A chatbot's not going to be able to create a very good review, right? If we think of a review much like a narrative, something that can really only be generated by a human because it requires original thought, if we're thinking about it that way and we remember how these large language models work, then we know that all we're going to get from a chatbot is a summary of other people's reviews. And if that's what you want, then a chatbot is great. I mean, you can definitely get a good summary of what a lot of other people are saying about that subject online. And I can't stop you guys if you want to read some of those. Obviously, what we're doing this week will require you to actually look at some reviews, find reviews, and then sort of respond to them. But I wouldn't say it's really essential to read reviews about the subject that you choose to write about for SA2. I mean, you can. I'm not going to prohibit that or try to stop you, but I mean, it can help to just give you a sense of what the majority feels. Like, if you just want to get an idea of how popular the movie or the product or the restaurant is, I mean, you can certainly consult online reviews and you can look at some summaries if you want, but ultimately, you have to write your own. And if all you're doing is asking a chatbot to do the review, then you're just going to get other people's opinions, other people's interpretations, other people's evaluations, and that's just not very helpful. So, for this kind of writing, for this kind of work, I think AI can be helpful on the front end. If you want to look at other reviews, if you want to find out what's being said, what's going on right now, and obviously for some of that pre-writing stuff as you're getting started, sure. But much like the narrative, I think we need to do most of the drafting ourselves. And also, when we're wrapping up with the interpretation and evaluation, that really has to be yours if you want to stand out and have a successful review. So that's just review. Those are essential stages. If we're not checking all of those boxes, both this week for the discussion post and next week for SA2, that just means that our reviews are not quite working yet. Okay, so let's move into some new territory and think a little bit more about sort of our review writing system and how we're going to approach SA2 pretty soon. So, just a few things to remember about audience, purpose, and format. So, I think I mentioned some of this last time, but always start with purpose. What are you trying to achieve with your review? What do you want to accomplish? So you need to start taking notes. You need to get some ideas down. And this really comes back to pre-writing, right? This is going to be a lot of what you're doing when you are first generating ideas. Focus on your purpose. What are your thoughts about your subject? What do you want to say about your subject? How are you going to break it down? You need to have some kind of a framework or an organizational sort of structure in mind. And a lot of that's going to require thought and planning. So this is really what pre-writing can help you with. You need to get some of these ideas down on paper. All right. And the note taking can really start even earlier. You really need to sit down with your subject, right? At the beginning of next week, when we get moving on SA2, you need to sit down with your movie, your show up. whatever it is, right? I think I'm gonna take the movie and show off the table because we've already done it. I think I'm gonna uh, actually give us a more narrow set of choices. So you'll probably have the option between restaurant, travel destination. Well, I think I'll do restaurant or book because we haven't done a book review yet, but I'll give you the option. You can do a book or a restaurant. Okay. And then I would like us at least this week to try on a travel destination and the restaurant review. And then you'll have one of those that you can choose for SA2. But whatever, so yeah, this week we'll take a break from movies and shows. But we can do those ultimately if we want to for SA2. So, whatever you're choosing, whatever type of review you want to do, you really have to sit with your subject first. And I want to spend a moment on this actually because it might seem rather obvious, but I think in this era where we are outsourcing some of our writing tasks to chatbots, I think one thing that we can sometimes lose through doing that is a closeness with our subject. And I very much observe this with texts. When we are relying on chatbots to sometimes generate outlines for us or rewrite some of our work or even to draft some of our work, what that ultimately means for us is that it means a lot of things, but one thing that it means is that we're going to have less of a close relationship with the text that we are talking about because maybe we're mostly relying on summaries of that text, or we're relying on what the chatbot told us about that text. So we know some things about the text, like we know a lot of information, but we don't have a very close personal relationship with the text because we have all these intermediaries. If you guys know what I mean by that, it's almost like you have all these middlemen that are now in between you and the text. You have summaries and a chat bot and something else and a website. So you're getting further and further away from your subject. That's not always a totally bad thing. I mean, you can still learn about your subject, but it does make certain kinds of textual analysis more difficult because maybe we haven't read that entire text, or we did read it once, but we didn't practice active reading strategies, we didn't take notes, and we've mostly been relying on summaries. So we don't really know the text that well. We're not that close to the text. And that ultimately shows up in writing. So I thought we could maybe avoid some of those difficulties with SA2 because you don't have to analyze a written text. Now, you can do a book review if you want, but if you're not really textually inclined, I would really recommend picking something else, doing the restaurant review or the product review or a travel review, because then you can sit with the subject that you actually enjoy. Right? You can pick a travel destination that you like, a place that you've actually been, or you can pick a restaurant or, a product that you like, something that you do have a personal relationship with. You don't have to fake it or pretend like you do. But you always want to start by sitting with your subject because nobody else will understand your subject unless you do. You can't share a greater understanding until you have arrived at it yourself. Okay? So if it's a show, watch the show. If it's a movie, watch the movie. Book, read the book. Restaurant, go back to the restaurant. Now you might not be able to go back to the travel destination, but use your memory. You might have pictures. And then if it's the product, pick up the product, right? Have it in hand as you're working, because why not? Get as close to it as you can. Okay. And as you're doing that, you're starting to form your interpretation. You're starting to think about your evaluation even before the analysis is complete. So you can start jotting down ideas, opinions, thoughts, whatever comes to mind. But at some point, your pre writing needs to get a little bit more organized, and you really need to start thinking about individual elements, individual parts. And I recommend making a list. That's really part of your idea generation. Make a list of the parts or elements of your subject that you really want to focus on. You really think are, these are the ones that are really going to matter for your analysis. Okay. But also always have that purpose in mind. This is where I want to end up. This is what I want to explain. This is what I want to say about my subject. All right. Always keep purpose in mind. And also, like we've said before, always keep your audience in mind. So you can't be expected to know exactly who is going to be in your audience. There are many potential readers, like we've said before. So you don't know exactly who's going to read it, and you don't know what those readers are going to know versus what they will not know. So that's why a good description at the beginning of your analysis is always important. That's why being thorough is important. You want to give them all the information, all the detail that they need. But remember, you're ultimately going to be giving them advice. You're going to be giving them directions. You're going to be sort of telling them what to do in regard to your subject by the time you're evaluating at the end. So think about your readers. What do you want for them? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to think? And perhaps most importantly, what do you want their understanding to be of your subject once they are finished reading your review? Because that's going to fuel a lot of your decision making, right? You're not writing for yourself, and you're not just writing for me, even though I am obviously a pretty important member of your audience. But you need to think about regular people, not just teachers, right? You need to think about regular readers, your friends, your family members, regular folks who might buy that product or might go to that restaurant or might watch that movie. What do they need in order to understand? What do they need? And remember what I mentioned last time. You might want to offer spoilers if you're doing a movie or a show review or a book review. You might want to warn your readers, though, if you're going to do that. If you're going to give away the ending, you guys know how it is. Sometimes people read a review of a book before they've finished reading the book. And that's, of course, true with movies and other stuff, too. So you might want to provide the warning. Again, you're being considerate of your audience. If they want to know how it ends, they can read on. If they don't want to know, they can stop. All right. Now, there's fewer spoilers with other types of reviews like products or travel or restaurants, but you might think there are surprises. There are surprises that you want your readers to experience authentically, so you might not want to give those elements away. So think about that. Again, that's part of brainstorming. That's part of basic idea generation as you're taking notes. But I would always recommend if you're doing a review of a movie, book, or show, you need to return to that text and take notes as you're going back through it. If it's an entire show, you might not be able to rewatch the whole show if it's multiple seasons, but maybe put on your favorite season, put on a few episodes, refresh your memory. All right, that's going to help you get more specific. And if it's a song or an album, or a relatively short book that you can go back and experience again, or a movie that you can just sit and watch in an hour and a half or 2 hours, revisit it. Revisit it if you have the time, at least watch parts of it or reread parts of it and jot down some notes, ideas, potential parts to analyze, right? It always helps to do that. And yes, as we've said, you can get some help with idea generation from AI. But you don't want to outsource all of your idea generation to a chatbot. You guys can see how this might be dangerous, right? If you're not generating any of your own ideas, if you basically ask a chatbot to generate the ideas for you, then you might do a lot of the writing yourself, but the ideas won't be exclusively yours. I want at least most of the ideas to be yours as well. So I would recommend doing some brainstorming on your own, generate some ideas, write them down, and then you can get some help on the next steps of pre-writing, which would really be more like outlining. Right? Once you have some stuff written down, once you've generated some ideas, you can get some help constructing an outline because that outline will contain your ideas. So it's not a bad thing to get help with organization. But you have to ask yourself, what am I organizing? Am I organizing my ideas or am I just organizing stuff that I've gotten, from pre existing sources? And there might be a balance. There might be a way to balance those two, but at least some, if not most, of the ideas in your reviews need to come from you. But also, the final part on audience is just think about like the real world impact, right? I mean, you guys know the impact that reviews can have, right? They really can affect business or sales. They can affect reputations of products or places. So be very intentional about what you're trying to accomplish and what you want your readers to do, because in some cases that can have real world effects. And again, you can think of your own experiences before you try a new restaurant. You might go online and read some reviews. So imagine your review being used in that way. Before you go to watch the movie, let me read a few reviews. What are people saying about it before I drop, $20 for a ticket and a popcorn and a soda? So imagine people using your review in that same way. What do you want the ultimate result to be? How do you want your review to sway people? How do you want your review to function in the real world? Think about it like that. And then always think about your format. Think about organization. I have given you a format. We can follow sort of a shorter version of that four-stage format with description, analytical stage, interpretive stage, and then evaluative stage. We want to stick with that. We can do a shortened version for this week's discussion post, and then we're going to do a longer version next week in Essay 2. But organization matters, right? You need to really break things down, not just in a detailed way, but in an organized way. You don't want it to feel chaotic. You don't want the readers to feel like we're jumping from one element to the next. That's why transitions between ideas, between elements, will be important. We'll talk more about that next week when we're actually writing. But also, you need to think about the relationships between the individual parts and elements. Because when they're related, when they're connected, that's going to help you. Right? That's going to help you stay organized, and it will help your readers stay clear and oriented as they're reading through your work. But if you follow my format and you just develop all of those stages well, you should be in pretty good shape. All right. So we don't really have anything else new to talk about, but I did want to discuss this week's discussion post just a little bit because it's different. It's a bit different than what we have done in the past. So it is a two-step process that I would like you guys to follow. The first step, luckily, does not involve any writing. Okay, so I just want you guys to go online and do some searching. And I want you to find good examples of a couple of different types of reviews. So I've already mentioned them. We're going to do a restaurant review, a review of a travel destination, and this can be kind of flexible. This could be a city or a province, a state. You can kind of get as specific as you want, but usually the more specific, the better. Think of a travel destination, somewhere you would fly to or drive to for a vacation. But it could be a lot of different kinds of locations. It could be a city, it could be a big resort on the beach, it could be a national park, whatever. I don't care. If it's a place that people go to on vacation, it will work. Okay. Um, so you can do a travel destination, a restaurant, or a product. Okay. So first, we are looking for examples of these types of reviews. All right. So let's just move away from narratives for a while because that's a typical school thing and we're probably sick of doing it. So let's just focus on these other kinds of reviews: restaurant, product, travel. Find examples of each kind. All right. I don't care where the examples come from, but use good judgment. I want good reviews. I want reviews written by humans. I would like reviews that have author names attached to them. So they're not just some random AI slop. If they're from websites, fine. If they're from popular newspapers or magazines, fine. As we know, a lot of newspapers and magazines exist in online form now. So you can read their articles on their website. Fine. Wherever you get them, wherever you find them. But I want you to use judgment when you're reading and selecting the reviews. Does it seem pretty thorough? Does it seem like it's pretty well done? Like if it has typos and like misspelled words, or if it's like super casual, super informal, I would not recommend using it. Right? These don't have to be done by professionals, but I want a certain level of polish. These are reviews that we can trust. These are reviews that seem reliable, okay? Based on how they sound, how they look, and the fact that we can tell that a human author wrote them. All right. And if they came from a reputable source, that's even better. But I kind of leave that up to you guys. All right. So find an example of each type: one restaurant review, one travel review, and one product review. All right. And then I just want you to share them. I would like you to put them in a document. I don't care if it's a Word doc or a PDF. You can just cut and paste. I just want to see them. Or if you want to link me to them, if that works better, that's fine. I just want to see the reviews that you have selected. I want to read what you have read. All right. However you want to do that, however you can make that happen for me. All right. So that's part one. Part two, I want you to write your own review using one of these as an example. So when it comes time to write, you just need to write one review of your own. All right. And it can be a restaurant, a travel, or a product, whatever you want to do. Totally up to you. Whatever you want. But use the good reviews that you found as a guide. Again, try to pick some that are at least kind of following our structure. Obviously, these reviewers aren't taking my English 101 class, so they don't have to do all of this stuff exactly as I'm telling you guys to do it, but try to see if they have an interpretation. Try to see if they have a clear evaluation. They really should. If it's a successful review, they're going to have those things, but also it would be good if they're descriptive. It would be good if they're actually analyzing individual parts and elements. So kind of use our criteria. If you don't think I would accept one of those reviews, if it's not really cutting it based on our standards, then it's not good enough for you. You need something of a higher caliber, something that's a little more high quality, a little more in depth, right? Something a little closer to what we are going to be doing. So for now, you're keeping your review short, right? It's a discussion post, but just try to check the essential boxes. Do a little bit of description, have at least one paragraph where you do most of your analysis, and then spend a little bit of time near the end, maybe a second paragraph, where you can do your interpretation and your evaluation. Okay, or however you want to do it, but just make sure that you're covering all four stages in your own review. But also pick up some good techniques from the examples that you found. You can deviate from my structure a little bit if you're taking something good from one of these reviews that you found. If you want to do something that they're doing, that's fine. That's how you grow as a writer. A lot of times it's great to find other good examples of the kind of writing that you want to do, and then you can sort of copy some of those techniques. You're not plagiarizing, right? The content will be your own, but you can do some of the same moves, a comparison, right? A certain kind of description, a certain kind of transition from one idea to the next, a certain way of moving from interpretation to evaluation, right? You'll pick up some things that you might want to try, and that's perfectly fine. But of course, that's why it's important to find good examples to follow. So you can follow my structure and follow some good examples that you locate for part one of the post, and then you do part two, which is just your own brief review. So pretty much what you were doing last week, except now we're reviewing different things. All right. And this should get us ready. This should be really good practice for Essay 2. And we will start working on that next week. Just like we had a full week to work on Essay 1, we will have a full week to work on Essay 2. And I'll kind of walk you through the writing process. We're going to do a few different things because it's a very different kind of writing compared to the narrative. But we're following our same basic steps. All of our pre-writing, I was talking about some of that today, then drafting, and then, of course, post writing. That means revising and editing. That's what we do last. So we'll walk through all of that for Essay 2 next week. If you have any questions, get in touch with me. By the time you're tuning in next week at the start of week 8, you need to have your subject selected. Okay, you need to know what you're going to be reviewing. So if you're having trouble deciding what you want to choose, get in touch with me. We can talk. We can help you figure it out before next week rolls around. All right. So good luck, and I'll see you next week.